into 1871, which is where we're at today. Basically, there was a Resident Act that was passed in 1790 that created a new federal district that became the capital of the United States from the original capital of Philadelphia. And the lands were donated by Maryland and Virginia. The Capital Territory included settlements that were already in the area. It included the port of Georgia in Maryland, and it included the town of Alexandria in Virginia. And basically, they named the city in honor of President Washington, and they called it Washington. So, and that was done in 1791. So after that, in 1801, Congress passed an Organic Act, which basically federalized that territory. So that basically the lands became together in an ownership pool, and they titled it a federal district. And it was located east of the Potomac. It was in the new county of Washington. And basically, there's where all of the laws were. The levying a court consisted of 7 justices of the peace that were appointed by the president, and they acted the laws of the land at that time on Maryland law of 1801. So we were still operating under the original framework of the 1776 Constitution. But what happened in 1871 was the fact that basically we were a country that was bankrupt. And Congress basically devised a scheme with the bankers who had loaned us the money. And in that scheme, they required certain things to happen. And basically, what happened was, because the 3-legged stool, as I've used in several analogies, were in play, you had the Vatican Church, who actually ruled the world. You had the City of London at that time, who was the money source of the world. And United States, when they joined this 3-legged stool, they became the 3rd leg in 1871. And over time, we've been positioned as the police state. So we're the enforcement arm of what is basically told us to do from the Vatican. Now, the Vatican has its own structure too, and we can get into that in a moment. But what happened in 1871 is that basically our freedom ended, and we had a second constitution that came into play. And that constitution was based upon one of the criteria set by the bankers that we had to accomplish to basically have our debt call at that time to be forgiven. Now, it's never been forgiven, because basically what happened was the Vatican Church opened up a corporation in Puerto Rico, and that corporation became what is now known as Washington, D.C. So basically, they took the district, the federal district that had been culminated underneath the 1790 Organic Act, and then in 1801 made it a district. They took all of that and they put that into this corporation. And that made then the governance of this area have a shape of its own government. So, and look at it this way. District of Columbia at that time became a city state. It had its own laws. It could act its own laws. It could do whatever it wanted to without the approval of the citizenry that was contained underneath the original Constitution of 1776. So de facto, what happened is the corporation came into effect. The City of London forgave the debt call at that time, but put us into bankruptcy, so that basically we were enslaved all the way from that point until today. And the Congress at that point in time put that district inside that corporation, making that district then a foreign country ownership, and then the governing laws that they established underneath the Constitution that they put in place as part of the bylaws of this corporation became the Constitution by which they were going to rule that 10-mile square. Now, that is all of the rulership that they had at the time. But if we go forward in time and go to Roosevelt days, when they enacted the Social Security Act and they forced Social Security upon all of the citizenry of the original Constitution of 1776, we became a asset of that corporation, and they enslaved us by leveraging our ability of generating revenue to repay the debt to the bankers that were part of this corporation. So the outcome of that meant that the United States government basically were controlled by a board of directors. That board of directors was consisted of the bankers and the members of the hierarchical order of the Catholic Church, Vatican. And they basically put in motion at that time the ability to do a number of events over history that we can talk about, but in essence, that was the framework. So what we see today is basically Washington, D.C. is a foreign country. It's owned by a foreign country. The people who work in Washington, D.C. are paid by a foreign country. Think about that. All of our tax dollars go directly to the Vatican banking system cartel. They don't go to the U.S. Treasury. U.S. Treasury has to borrow money. So the cycle of debt continues to go. And what the people that are in Washington, D.C. are actually employees of a corporation owned by a foreign entity governing the sovereign soil of the United States of America.